The certified letter showed up on a Tuesday morning, saying I had to pay $47,000 in fines for living in a house I'd owned for 12 years. But here's the thing, I wasn't even part of their HOA. I'm standing in my kitchen, my coffee mug steaming, in my hand, staring at these legal papers that looked like they were written in some ancient language. Outside my window, there's Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, who thinks she's the boss of everything, pointing at my house from her super neat lawn like she's planning an attack. The morning dew was sparkling on her grass, you know, the kind she probably measures with a ruler to make sure it's perfect. I took another sip of coffee and thought, lady, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. What would you do if someone tried to force you into an HOA you never joined? Drop your wildest HOA horror story below. I guarantee mine tops them all. And before we dive into this legal thriller, where are you watching from? I'm curious how many of you are dealing with neighborhood tyrants right now. My name's Garrett Mitchell, and 12 years ago, I thought I'd bought my slice of the American dream. Turns out I'd walked into a nightmare created by a woman who makes dictators look reasonable. Back in 2011, fresh out of the army after 2 tours in Afghanistan, I used my VA loan to buy 2.3 acres of pure freedom. The 1970s ranch house sits on the original Hendricks farm. We're talking about a time before subdivisions, when this area was still cow pastures and people used common sense. Willow Creek runs between my property and the fancy Willowbrook Estates development. That babbling water became my daily reminder that some boundaries are made by nature, not lawyers. I'm an independent contractor. I do electrical work, plumbing, whatever keeps food on the table for me and my 16-year-old daughter, Emma. After my divorce, this place became our safe spot. I built a workshop where the sweet smell of pine sawdust mixes with WD-40, and every morning I can taste the clean air that doesn't exist in subdivisions with their chemical lawn treatments. Emma loves it here. She's got space to breathe, creek access for catching tadpoles, and a dad who's actually around instead of deployed. Then came Karen Whitmore, the human version of a Homeowners Association nightmare. Karen's 52, drives a spotless white Lexus that's never seen a speck of mud, and rules her $800,000 McMansion kingdom like Marie Antoinette with a measuring tape. 6 years as HOA president have turned her into a suburban spy, knows every neighbor's garbage day schedule and how often they mow their lawn. Her husband Brad isn't just sitting back, he's the county planning commissioner. That detail becomes super important later, but for now, just remember it as a big conflict of interest. The first meeting happened at my mailbox on a Tuesday morning. Karen marched across the street wearing pearls and looking super mad, holding her clipboard like a weapon. The crunch of gravel under her fancy heels announced her coming like incoming artillery. Your workshop violates neighborhood standards, she declared, without even saying hello. I looked at my property, then at hers, across the creek, then back at her. Ma'am, I appreciate the concern, but I'm not in your HOA. Her smile could have frozen coffee in a flash. We'll see about that. That was 18 months ago. What followed was like a lesson in mind games and fights. Karen started timing my work schedule like a soldier, taking pictures of every visitor like she was building a spy file. She'd show up at her window whenever I started my power tools, arms crossed, looking super disapproving across 47 feet of creek bed. The woman actually bought binoculars, but Emma's 16th birthday party pushed Karen over the edge. Nothing wild, just a backyard barbecue with friends. Music until 9:30 p.m. perfectly okay under county noise rules.
Karen
called the police twice. That night, both times the officers found nothing wrong and left shaking their heads. One cop even grabbed a burger, joking that our party was the tamest call he'd had all week. The next morning changed everything. Emma found the violation notice tucked under my windshield wiper, fancy legal paper that felt weird in my fingers. Too official for such silly stuff. It listed my workshop, garden fence, and gravel driveway as unapproved changes, each with a $500 fine. Dad, Emma said, looking at the document like it might bite her. This woman has seriously lost her mind. Yeah, and here's what Karen was betting on, that I'd give in like every other working family she'd scared into doing what she wanted: pay up, shut up, tear down my workshop, and follow her suburban rules. She'd studied how to scare people, but she skipped basic research. It's because if Karen had checked county records, she'd have found something that would have saved everyone 18 months of legal fights. My property was left out of her HOA on purpose, for reasons that would eventually wreck her whole setup. But people like her don't check facts, they just attack. I poured fresh coffee, walked to my fence line, and stared across Willow Creek at Karen's perfect house with its perfect lawn and perfectly rotten base. Lady, I told the morning air, you just declared war on the wrong veteran. The creek kept flowing, not caring about human drama, which turned out to be the perfect attitude for what was coming next. 3 days after Emma's birthday party, Karen launched her first big attack with the skill of a suburban missile. The official HOA violation notice arrived by certified mail, because nothing says I'm serious like making someone sign for their hassle. This wasn't some quick note, it was a full-color, professionally printed document that probably cost more than most people's monthly phone bills. The paper felt fancy between my fingers, with that slick coding lawyers use to make nonsense look real. The violations read like a property owner's bad dream: unapproved outside changes, including but not limited to an unpermitted workshop building, non-matching fence materials, unauthorized gravel driveway surface, and not keeping landscaping up to community looks. Each one carried a $500 fine, 30 days to fix it, or face bigger actions, including liens and court stuff. I had to give it to Karen for her skill at scaring people with paperwork. Too bad she'd forgotten one tiny detail. My first stop was the county courthouse, where the musty smell of old papers and years of legal fights filled the air like a library full of arguments. The clerk, a patient woman named Dorothy, who'd seen every kind of property fight, helped me pull my original deed from 1970, back in Afghanistan. Our intel officer used to say, always check with primary sources, secondary ones lie. Turns out, that advice works just as well for property law as it does for avoiding bombs. The deed was super clear. My property boundaries were recorded and measured before Willowbrook Estates by 40 years. Survey numbers showed exactly what I thought. Was 47 feet outside HOA control, separated by Willow Creek, and protected by natural boundary rules. Just to be sure, I called the HOA management company. The confused receptionist put me on hold 3 times before admitting they had no record of my address in their system. Sir, if you're not in our database, you're not in our HOA, she said, like she was explaining basic math to a little kid. I should have known Karen wouldn't accept reality nicely. 2 days later, she showed up at my door with help her brother-in-law, Rick, a part-time surveyor whose main skill seemed to be owning an orange vest and a measuring tape. The smell of Rick's cheap cologne mixed with Karen's worry as they stood on my porch trying to look official while talking nonsense about the creek moving over time and updated boundary checks. Here's Karen's first real mistake. She claimed the creek boundary had shifted and demanded to come on my land to fix the property lines. Ma'am, I said, holding up my county-certified survey, water doesn't move property lines. That's not how law works. Karen's face turned red. We'll see what my attorney says about that. But here's where Karen made her deadly mistakes. She showed she was hiring lawyers before doing her homework. While she was busy playing property police, I was finding something huge about how Willowbrook Estates started, Mrs. Patterson. My 83-year-old neighbor who remembered when this area was cow pastures invited me over for coffee and the kind of gossip that changes court cases. Her kitchen smelled like vanilla and fairness as she told the real story. Strangest thing, she said, stirring sugar into her cup slowly, like someone who'd outlived 3 HOA presidents. The original subdivision plans clearly showed your property left out of the development. Environmental concerns. They said something about the creek flood zone. She leaned forward like sharing a secret. But Brad, that's Karen's husband, pushed the approval through anyway. His construction company got the contract for 60% of those houses. The pieces clicked together like a puzzle solving itself. My old army training kicked in when the enemy shows a pattern. You use it. The next violation notice arrived a week later, this time claiming my property was a nuisance hurting community. Property values. Karen had gone from fines to threats, warning about liens and foreclosure. She'd also hired Pembroke & Associates, the kind of law firm that advertises on billboards and charges for scaring people. But Karen's scare tactics backfired big time. She'd created her own group of fighters against her. The Kowalski family came up to me at the grocery store, talking quietly, like we were planning a revolution in the fruit section. They'd been forced to remove their kid's swing set because it broke aesthetic rules at $1,000. In changes to please Karen's suburban control. She told us we could face legal action if we didn't comply, Mrs. Kowalski whispered. We couldn't afford to fight it. Mrs. Patterson mentioned the Rodriguez family, who'd moved away after Karen's harassment got to calling their boss a pattern. Showed up, Karen targeted working families who couldn't afford long court fights, while ignoring the same rule breaks by richer neighbors. The funny irony, while Karen was busy hiring fancy lawyers and printing color notices, she was actually building my case for me. Every talk, every call, every scare attempt was being quietly written down. The creek kept flowing between our properties, marking a boundary no amount of legal tricks could change. Karen thought she was fighting a simple property fight. She had no idea she'd just given me the tools to wreck her whole empire. Karen's next move came with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer wrapped in legal paper. 2 weeks after my courthouse visit, a thick envelope from Pembroke & Associates landed in my mailbox with the weight of fancy threats. The cease and desist letter was a masterpiece of legal show. 4 pages of whereas and heretofore is demanding I stop all unauthorized stuff and give in to HOA rules. But here's where Karen showed she'd watched too many lawyer TV shows. Letter claimed my property was a continuing nuisance, hurting HOA home values, and demanded I let them on my land to put up proper boundary markers. The nerve was amazing. She wanted permission to trespass to prove I was trespassing. I'd seen this plan before in the Army. We called it escalation through paperwork. When someone can't win fairly, they bury you in official-looking junk, hoping you'll give up from being tired. My response was quick and sharp. I contacted Janet Reeves, a local attorney who helps veterans and has a reputation for beating bullies. Janet took one look at Karen's legal threat and actually laughed out loud, not the usual reaction to fancy lawyers. Garrett, she said, her office smelling like leather books and right anger. This woman just handed us a harassment case on a silver platter. Janet's counter, cease and desist, was like poetry in legal words, 3 paragraphs citing property rights law, harassment rules, and a warning that more contact would lead to quick court action. She also added a helpful reminder that asking to come on private property without right is called attempted trespass. Karen's reaction was totally wild. Within days, she'd set up an emergency HOA meeting about the boundary dispute crisis. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as Karen spread her story of property value panic. She'd made charts showing how my illegal business was supposedly lowering everyone's home worth. The accusation hurt because it was partly true. I did use my workshop for some jobs sometimes. But here's what Karen didn't get about small business rules. Home-based businesses are totally legal, if zoned and licensed right. My electrical license was up to date, my insurance paid, and my property zoned for this work. But facts never stop. A good rumor campaign. Karen's whisper network went into high gear. Suddenly, my neighbors were getting concerned. Citizen updates about the unlicensed contractor running an illegal business next to their kids. She'd turned neighborhood gossip into a sharp weapon, targeting anyone who might side with me. Pressure got worse when county code enforcement showed up at my door, not by chance, but from multiple anonymous complaints about zoning breaks. The inspector, a tired man named Phillips, who'd seen this before, spent 30 minutes checking what I already knew. Everything was legal, licensed, and permitted. Off the record, Phillips said as he packed his clipboard, whoever's filing these is wasting everyone's time. Your setup is cleaner than most business places I check. But Karen wasn't done with her spy work. My security cameras, put up after the first notice, caught something amazing. Karen's brother-in-law Rick sneaking around my property at dawn, putting orange survey stakes in key spots. The footage showed him measuring with a tape, then placing markers to make it look like my workshop was on HOA land. When I faced Rick directly, he stuttered about preliminary measurements and ran off like a kid caught spray painting. The smell of his nervous sweat hung in the morning air long after his truck left. Emma started feeling unsafe walking to her school bus. Teenage girls notice adult drama. and she'd seen Karen timing her daily spy drives to match Emma's schedule. One morning, Emma found Karen parked at the creek bridge, taking photos of our house with a long lens like some neighborhood photographer. "Dad, this is getting seriously creepy," Emma said over breakfast, her voice showing she felt watched at home. That's when I knew Karen had gone from harassment to scaring us. My old platoon sergeant used to say, "Document everything, because crazy people show themselves if you give them enough rope." Karen was making her own legal trap with every bigger move. The community Facebook group. Willowbrook neighbors blew up with competing stories. Karen supporters posted about property values and community rules, while more residents shared their own HOA harassment tales. The comment threads were like a civil war fought with emojis and sneaky suburban words. But the most telling moment came when Mrs. Patterson quietly said she'd been recording Karen's meetings for years, just in case someone needed proof of the HOA president's real self. "Honey," she said, pouring tea with steady hands from surviving 8 decades of neighborhood drama, got recordings that would curl your hair. That's when I realized Karen hadn't just picked a fight with me she'd accidentally started. A war with the whole neighborhood's memories of her bad behavior. The creek kept flowing, not caring about human silliness. While Karen built the case against herself, one paranoid step at a time, Karen's nuclear option arrived on a Thursday morning that started normal until the sheriff's deputy knocked, serving papers for a $47,000 lawsuit. The complaint read like a wild dream from someone who'd watched too much legal TV. Karen wasn't just asking for built-up fines anymore. She claimed I'd somehow agreed to HOA membership.
I'm such a bitch just by owning property within
a 5-mile radius of her subdivision. The lawsuit demanded I follow all HOA rules right away. A court order stopping any more property changes, and enough legal fees to buy a nice car. Sitting in Janet's office, morning sun coming through windows that had seen 1,000 property fights, I watched my attorney's face go from worry to barely held anger. "Garrett," Janet said, flipping through pages of Karen's made-up story. "This woman is either totally out of touch or running the most expensive bluff in county history." But Janet's deep look into Karen's past showed something way worse than being out of touch. Court records showed Karen had filed 6 previous boundary fights over the past decade. 3 families had moved away instead of fighting costly court battles. The Rodriguez family, the ones Mrs. Patterson mentioned, had actually lost their home to foreclosure after legal fees got too high. Karen wasn't just a neighborhood pest. She was a repeat bully who targeted working-class families on purpose. The pattern was scary. Find families who couldn't afford long fights, make up violations, increase legal pressure until they gave in or left. Rich neighbors mysteriously never got the same checks for the same breaks. While I was taking in the size of Karen's setup, she started her media attack with the planning of a political campaign. Local TV news got calls about a property value crisis threatening good homeowners. Karen set up photo shoots, showing herself keeping community standards while pointing dramatically at my workshop like it was a dangerous factory. The Channel 7 story aired with the headline, "Ow! Battle Divides Neighborhood," featuring Karen and her best pearls explaining how one person's refusal to follow rules was wrecking property values for hardworking families. They didn't interview me because Karen told them I wasn't available, which was news to me since no one tried. But Karen's media push backfired in the best way. Emma's friend Madison, daughter of the Kowalski family, became our inside info source. During sleepovers that were like secret meetings, through teen social networks that would impress spies, I learned Karen had promised lower HOA fees to neighbors who backed her lawsuit. More damaging, Madison overheard Karen bragging to her book club about finally getting rid of that contractor in his noisy workshop. The conversation, recorded on Madison's phone while she pretended to do homework, showed Karen's real reason. Wasn't property values, it was personal meanness. The harassment got worse, going beyond legal stuff into real damage. Someone scattered roofing nails across my driveway, popping to tires on my work truck. The smell of rubber and betrayal filled the morning air as I knelt by my broken vehicle, picking metal bits from the tires. Emma's car got keyed in the school. Parking lot long scratches that spelled move across her driver's side door. Watching my 16-year-old daughter try not to cry while looking at the damage, I felt something change inside me from defending to attacking. Anonymous flyers showed up around the neighborhood with blurry photos of my workshop and text warning about unlicensed electrical work endangering family safety. The flyers listed my business phone, encouraging people to report dangers to the state board. The check found no problems because there weren't any. But Karen's plan was working. Several regular clients got warning calls about hiring unlicensed workers. My business money dropped 30% as worried customers picked other electricians to avoid the drama. During one really weird evening, caught Karen parked across the creek with binoculars, timing my work like a soldier. When our eyes met through her lenses, she didn't even look sorry, just wrote something on her clipboard and drove away. The mind pressure was meant to break me. But Karen had miscalculated one big thing. She'd never fought someone who'd survived real combat stress. Compared to attacks in Afghanistan, suburban mind games felt like a show. Janet's research found the smoking gun that would change everything, Original County. Planning papers from 2009 that clearly recommended leaving my property out of the subdivision because of creek flood zone rules. The environmental study, a document Karen's husband Brad had access to as commissioner, said my land should stay separate for nature protection. Karen and Brad both knew my property was left out on purpose, yet they'd spent 18 months claiming the opposite. This wasn't a boundary fight anymore. It was fraud, conspiracy, and harassment wrapped in legal papers and suburban niceness. The creek kept flowing, washing away Karen's trustworthiness one lie at a time. But she wasn't done wrecking herself. Yet, the discovery that changed everything came from the most unlikely place, its filing cabinet in the county courthouse basement that smelled like mold and old justice. Janet's paralegal, a determined woman named Sarah, who treated legal digging like treasure hunting, had been going through 2009 environmental studies when she found the big proof buried under 15 years of paperwork. The document was called Willowbrook Estates Environmental Assessment, and it read like a prediction of Karen's fall. The study clearly recommended leaving out my property, called Parcel 47B, the Hendricks Homestead, from any development because of creek flood rules and nature protection needs. But here's where it got interesting. The engineer's signature had a handwritten note in the margin that made my blood cold. Commissioner Whitmore advised of flood zone concerns, exclusion mandatory. For EPA compliance, Brad Whitmore, Karen's husband, hadn't just known about leaving my property out. He'd been officially warned that including it would break federal environmental law. Janet spread the documents across her conference table like pieces of a conspiracy. Puzzle Garrett, this gets worse. Look at the incorporation papers for Willowbrook Estates, HOA. The HOA's starting documents had a signature I recognized but had never seen before. Robert Hendricks, previous owner, Parcel 47B. The problem? Robert Hendricks had been dead for 6 months when that signature was supposedly notarized. Handwriting checks would later confirm what we thought. Someone had faked a dead man's agreement to include my property in an HOA that legally couldn't include it anyway. But the real big find came when Sarah checked property tax records with Karen's money history. Karen's perfect McMansion was deep in debt-free mortgage refinances on pumped-up property values, with monthly payments that needed the neighborhood to keep fake high values or she'd lose the house. She's been using HOA harassment to keep property values up, Janet explained, pointing to a graph showing home prices in Willowbrook versus nearby areas. Every family she's forced to fix up or move has kept her equity bubble going. The lawsuit wasn't about community rules. It was about Karen's money survival. Mrs. Patterson's collection of recorded HOA meetings gave the final proof we needed. Her old cassette recorder had captured Karen's true words during what she thought were private talks. The most damaging recording was from March 2022. That contractor's property technically isn't in our jurisdiction, but he'll never fight us. Working people can't afford lawyers. We just keep the pressure up until he complies or moves away. It's another good one from June 2022. Brad says we can't legally force him to join, but what's he going to do? Hire an attorney. People like that always fold when you throw enough legal paperwork at them. Karen had been running a protection scam disguised as an HOA, targeting families based on thinking they couldn't fight back. The most chilling recording came from August 2022. just after Emma's birthday party. I finally found a way to get rid of that veteran and his noisy workshop. We'll bury him in legal fees until he breaks. 23 minutes of Karen's own voice, recorded by a sweet old lady who'd pretended to nap during meetings, while catching every word of the plot. But the big surprise was finding that Brad's construction company had built 60% of the homes in Willowbrook Estates. Homes sold at high prices because buyers thought they were getting into a legal HOA. With set rules, every sale was possibly fake. Every HOA fee collected was stealing. Every violation fine was extortion. Karen and Brad hadn't just harassed me. They'd tricked a whole neighborhood for over a decade. Sitting in Janet's office, surrounded by proof of planned fraud, I realized how weak Karen really was. This wasn't a property fight anymore. It was a criminal plot that could unravel their whole money empire. The question wasn't if I could win it, was if I wanted to totally destroy 2 lives or just get justice. Emma's keyed car in our families. 18 months of hassle answered that pretty clearly. Karen had declared war on the wrong veteran. She was about to learn what total victory really looked like. The war. Council met in my workshop on a Saturday morning that smelled like coffee, sawdust, and right anger. Janet spread legal papers across my workbench while Mrs. Patterson brought a thermos of coffee strong enough to power a legal revolution. The Kowalski family joined us, along with the Rodriguez family via video from their new City-N army of Karen's victims finally ready to fight back. Emma took notes on her laptop, treating the strategy session like the most important school project ever. Watching my 16-year-old daughter document adult wrongdoing, I felt proud and sad at the same time. Here's our battle plan, Janet announced. Organizing documents with the skill of a general planning an invasion. We file a motion to dismiss Karen's lawsuit based on fake HOA starting. At the same time, we launch a countersuit for harassment, business messing, and conspiracy. Then we ask for an emergency order, stopping the HOA from collecting any fees while we prove their whole legal base is built on lies. Mrs. Patterson's cassette recordings were written out and checked by a court worker who'd heard every kind of confession, but said Karen's casual talk of targeting working families was extra disturbing. The audio was surprisingly clear. Mrs. Patterson's old recorder caught Karen's voice better than new gadgets. Putting together the evidence felt like building a case against organized crime. County planning papers were sorted by date, showing Brad's planned abuse of his job. Money records showed the conflict of interest. Brad's company profited from every family Karen forced into costly fixes. Video from my security cameras documented 18 months of harassment, boundary tricks, and scare attempts. The footage of Rick placing fake survey stakes was especially bad, clear proof of plotting fraud. Sarah Morgan, our inside info coordinator, disguised as a teen sleepover fan, had recorded Karen's book club confessions about getting rid of that contractor. The audio from Madison's phone, caught while she pretended to do homework, showed planning that turned harassment into criminal plotting. Dad, Emma said, looking up from her notes, "This woman basically confessed to everything on tape. How stupid is she?" "Arrogant," Mrs. Patterson corrected, stirring sugar into her coffee with the patience of someone who'd outlived 3 neighborhood bosses. She thought she was untouchable because she'd never faced real pushback. Our media plan centered on investigative reporter Sarah Morgan, who focused on local corruption and had followed HOA fraud cases across the state. Janet prepared a press release showing not just my harassment, but the pattern of targeting working families over years. The technical prep needed experts who could explain Karen's crimes in words judges and juries would get. A professional surveyor confirmed the original boundary measurements, while an environmental engineer backed the 2009 flood study that Brad ignored. The handwriting expert's analysis of the fake documents was crushing. The signature for Robert Hendricks shows clear signs of copying. The writer was imitating from a sample rather than writing naturally. Plus, the death date is 6 months before the signature date, making forgery the only explanation. Financial checkers found that HOA money had been wrongly used to pay for Karen's legal fights against homeowners. Residents had been funding their own harassment through required fees without knowing. Behind the scenes, Madison reported growing panic at Karen's house. Brad had been seen shredding papers in his garage, An act photographed by alert neighbors who'd finally realized their HOA president might be a criminal. Karen was trying to borrow money for rising legal costs, while the HOA company thought about dropping Willowbrook as a client. Our mind warfare was subtle, but WorkTie started obvious prep for a big workshop expansion, ordering wood, concrete, and supplies in amounts, suggesting permanent building. The permits were legal and filed right, but Karen's visible stress during her daily spy drives showed it was hitting home. Local support came from surprise places. The electricians' union offered money backing for a member's harassment case. Veterans groups gave legal fund donations after hearing about targeting a military family. An environmental group got interested in creek protection. And 3 current HOA board members privately said they'd testify against Karen's leading. Most valuable info came from understanding HOA openness laws that Karen had broken for years. Most residents didn't know they had rights to see financial records, review meeting notes, and challenge fees through state laws. Here's what Karen never got, Janet explained, organizing our attack plan. HOA boards must give full money openness to homeowners. Every secret fee, every legal cost, every contract is public record that members can demand. By Sunday evening, our workshop had become a legal command center. Evidence boxes lined the walls, expert talks were scheduled, and our media push was ready. Emma looked up from her laptop where she'd been researching similar cases nationwide. Dad, Karen's not just going to lose this lawsuit. She's going to jail, isn't she? The creek bubbled, its okay outside, flowing toward Karen's house, where justice was about to flood her perfect suburban world. War was coming to Willowbrook Estates. And Karen had given us all the tools we needed. Karen's desperation hit new levels when she showed up at my door on a Tuesday evening with an offer that smelled of panic and cheap perfume. "Let's be reasonable adults about this," she said, holding a folder like it had suburban pea secrets. "I'm prepared to settle this whole misunderstanding for $15,000, a fraction of what you owe, really." Standing on my porch in her fancy blazer, Karen looked like a real estate agent trying to sell bad land. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman, who demanded $47,000 in fake fines, was now begging me to take a generous deal that would still cost more than my truck. "Ma'am," I replied, leaning against my doorframe with the easy confidence of someone with all the cards. "I don't negotiate with extortionists." Her smile cracked like cheap paint in hot sun. "You'll regret this decision, Mr. Mitchell." Karen's shift to personal war marked the start of her most destructive time. Within days, whispers started in neighborhood social media about my Army service. Anonymous posts suggested I was a dangerous veteran with PTSD, who was a safety risk to kids. The claim hit like a gut punch, not because it was true, but because it used bad ideas about veterans while attacking my bond with Emma. Anyone who knew me understood. I was about as dangerous as a friendly dog with a tool belt, but Karen was. Counting on fear-beating facts, the damage campaign went beyond mind games into real wrecking. Someone cut my workshop's main power line with cutters, leaving the wire dangling like a cut nerve. The sharp smell of electrical burning filled the morning air as I checked damage that could have started a fire if I hadn't caught it early. Security cameras caught it all, a figure in dark clothes coming at 3 a.m., cutting the line, then running toward the creek. The video was too blurry for sure ID, but the timing matched perfectly with Karen's settlement rejection. 2 days later, Emma found nails scattered across our driveway in a pattern to pop tires. The careful placement near the garage, where we'd drive, showed planning that turned vandalism into an attack on our daily life. "Dad, I'm scared," Emma admitted, while we swept up the metal bits from the asphalt. That's when I decided to move Emma to Mrs. Patterson's house for a bit for her safety. Watching my daughter pack clothes because of neighborhood bullying filled me with anger that made Afghanistan seem peaceful. County Building Inspector Phillips showed up for another random safety check, the third in 2 months. His tired look suggested he knew who was filing these fake reports. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, clipboard in hand, but voice kind, "I've checked your property more than some big places. Everything's perfect as usual. Whoever's calling these is wasting taxpayer money." But Karen's harassment network went beyond anonymous calls. Several regular clients got concerned citizen warnings about hiring unlicensed contractors under investigation. The calls were scripted well, mentioning specific jobs and claiming safety breaks that didn't exist. My business income dropped 40% as nervous customers chose other electricians to avoid seeming regulatory trouble. Karen was wrecking my work life while hiding behind nameless accusations. The mind warfare got deeper when I caught Karen parked across the creek with pro spy gear binoculars, long camera, notebook. She'd turned stalking into a suburban spy operation. When I walked to my fence and waved, she didn't back off, but took photos of me taking photos of her. Brad's panic was more obvious, but just as bad neighbors saw him burning papers in his backyard fire pit, filling the evening air with smoke that smelled like burning secrets. The county ethics check into his conflict was speeding up, and his desperate paper destruction was being noted by the same neighbors he'd helped. Karen bully. Emma's friend Madison gave regular updates about growing chaos at Karen's house, yelling. Between Karen and Brad, visits from costly lawyers, phone calls, ending with Karen screaming about ungrateful neighbors and wild theories. Madison says Karen's been crying a lot, Emma reported during one evening check-in. She keeps saying everyone's ganging up on her unfairly. The nice irony was that Karen's growing desperation was giving evidence for every charge we planned. Each act of damage, each nameless threat, each business mess was being noted and saved for the legal payback coming like a flood. But Karen's most dangerous time was still ahead, because desperate people make desperate choices. And Karen was running out of legal ways just as her money world was falling apart. The creek kept flowing toward her house, carrying the smell of justice that she could probably sense but refused to admit. Some people learn from mistakes. Others keep going until they wreck themselves totally. Karen was definitely in the second group. The County Planning Commission's public hearing was set for a Thursday evening that would decide if Karen's suburban empire lived or fell into deserved ruins. Karen got there early, turning the plain conference room into her war room. She'd hired a presentation helper, borrowed money for big visual effects, and wore a fancy business suit that screamed respectable homeowner under attack. Her PowerPoint was a master of suburban ads color charts, showing supposed property value drops. Pro photos of my workshop from bad angles to make it look threatening, and stories from 3 neighbors who'd been promised lower HOA fees for helping. The woman had turned harassment into a show. Emma and Madison sat in the back, phones recording everything like reporters covering history. Mrs. Patterson organized our witnesses' families. Karen had bullied over years while Janet prepared legal answers to whatever lies Karen would tell. Sarah Morgan brought a photographer for her follow-up story, making the hearing into the public show Karen had wanted to avoid. The smell of nervous sweat and desperate goals filled the room as Karen realized her private bullying was about to be front-page news. Karen's opening was pure acting, emotional talks about protecting family neighborhoods from business intrusion, with fake tears and big gestures toward charts showing her made-up value crisis. This illegal business operation, she declared, pointing at big photos of my workshop, has endangered our children's safety and destroyed the community standards that hardworking families depend on. To protect their investments, the audience murmured until the county engineer stood and broke Karen's show with one question, ma'am. According to your survey, this property extends 30 feet into Willow Creek. Are you claiming the creek moved? Yikes! Karen's helper scrambled to explain boundary shift math while a pro surveyor in the audience winced. The impossible claims became obvious to everyone except Karen, who kept going with wild geography ideas. My response was calm and measured. No big emotions, just facts laid out like in the Army. Original property deed from 1970. Pro survey showing 47 feet between my workshop and HOA land. Environmental study proving on purpose exclusion for flood protection. The bombshell witness talk started with Mrs. Patterson's recordings. The old tape player crackled, filling the room with Karen's voice from March 2022. That contractors' property technically isn't in our jurisdiction, but he'll never fight us. Working people can't afford lawyers. Karen's face went white as her words judged her, but the tape kept going. We just keep the pressure up until he complies or moves. A way it's worked on 3 other families. The handwriting expert's talk was crushing using big projected images. He showed how Robert Hendricks's signature was faked 6 months after his death. The analysis was so clear, even non-experts could see the copy marks, the pressure patterns. And hesitation marks indicate deliberate forgery, he explained, pointing to tiny proof of Karen's crime. The dead date eliminates any chance of it being real. Karen's meltdown started during the environmental engineer's talk about creek damage from her illegal changes. She interrupted with angry objections, accusing everyone of plotting against hard-working suburban families. "This is all fake news and paid testimony," she shouted, standing despite warnings. "These people are lying to protect their illegal friend." But the final blow came from the HOA management company rep,